just take us.
David, I think you're here.
It's okay. I think we sit where we want.
Okay.
That's okay. Right. Great. So, thanks very much, everybody, for being here. Great to be here in Tallinn in this wonderful space. I look around and think that our job here is to replace the old infrastructure with the new infrastructure while we're still living with the old stuff as well. But thanks for being here. We have a great panel today. We're going to talk about Global Gateway, which is the European Union's initiative for improving infrastructure around the world with all of our partners. Not just digital infrastructure, but of course digital is a big part of transport, of the fight against climate change, of health and education and so on. But here we're going to talk mostly about digital. I'll start off with a few points myself, and then I will ask each of our great panelists to say a few words. Then we'll have a bit of a discussion, then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions from the audience. It's obviously a crowded market out there with lots of acronyms. We've got BRI, we've got BRICS Plus, we've got Global Gateway, but I think we're confident in the EU that our offer to our partners has what it takes to succeed. And while we took some time to gear up, I think this year we've shown the world what we mean by Global Gateway in releasing in March this year the list of first 80 flagship projects, including a lot of digital projects. So cable infrastructure across the Mediterranean, across the Black Sea, the Atlantic, the Digital Alliance with Latin America, and a big data governance project in Africa where Estonia is very heavily involved and so on. So there's lots of activity going on in digital, but what I'm trying to do today is just to get an idea from our panelists what the challenges are and what we need to do in order to support our partners in the digital transformation. First I'll turn to Julia Gliddens, who's the chair of Pivotal. And Julia, you spent a long time working on data and analytics and what it needs to understand data. Could you give us an idea of how we're going to cope with what was called earlier this tsunami of data? How can we help around the world help our partners work on this data transformation? Julia.
Thank you very much, and it's such a pleasure for me to be back in Tallinn. I've had the privilege of coming back and forth to Tallinn for 20 years. It's my 20-year anniversary. And so on behalf of Pivotal, it's a privilege to be back here today. And it was a particularly rewarding moment for me when we talk about openness and digital governance and data and trust, and then partnership and infrastructure development as the global gateway is advancing. Because we've been talking about data and the power of data and open data and big data and linked data. It feels like forever. We've talked about the data tsunami, data as the new oil. We've talked about the transformational power of data, but we really haven't seen it come to its fruition. So the Prime Minister's opening remarks about collaboration, resilience, transparency, and openness, I think, combined with Dr. Karp's comments about, for all the wrong reasons, some very powerful outcomes coming in the way in which the public, private, and third sectors are now collaborating to truly unlock the power of data. If you recall, Dr. Karp said this morning, he was one of those folks that people kind of tolerated in a back room because this AI and this data stuff wasn't important. And he was it really resonated to me, because it used to be before AI, digital transformation was the big sexy toy. And I think all of us that have worked in public-private collaboration chase after new toys. So we've got an infrastructure project and they're going to infuse some smart sensors in a city, down a highway. But what did it really do for the citizen? What was the transformational impact? Very little. How did it really embed itself in a new way of looking at society and looking at governance? Very little. And what Ukraine has done is really bring the power of all of these potentials into the fore, out of the back room, and what I would call out of the world of pilots. And I would say to you, the EU is fantastic at piloting new innovations. But it's really a country like Estonia, the first digital nation, that has taken those innovations and embedded them throughout the society. And I think in the post-Ukrainian world, with the explosion of AI, we now have a unique opportunity to pull the technologies together in collaboration, the public, the private, and the third sector, to really make a difference on people's lives. And I would conclude by then saying, let's avoid the sexy toys. The sexy toy is not AI in a post-Ukrainian world, just as the sexy toy was not digital transformation. The end outcome are better services for citizens. The end outcome is a more equitable, just, and sustainable society for us all, for our partner countries, for Europe, for all of us as citizens of this planet. And I would argue in conclusion that the foundation to those outcomes that we're all searching for is data. If you have bad data, garbage in, garbage out. When we talk about large language models in an era of AI transformation, it's going to be more important than ever that we have solid governance around data.
Thanks very much. Collaboration, measurement, data, I think that's a good set of keywords. David, if I could turn to you. You're Cybersecurity Commissioner in Singapore, so you understand the importance of trusted connectivity, which is, I think, a phrase that became first important in the Tallinn Digital Summit a couple of years ago here. The trusted connectivity is a key part of how we're going to deliver the digital transformation. And also, you're from a part of the world where obviously everybody is trying to figure out how the future is going to look. How do you see the importance of something like Global Gateway from Singapore?
Great. Thanks very much, David. First of all, it's wonderful to be back here in Tallinn as well. I want to say that I commend the organizers for the geographical diversity of this panel. One would imagine that this is an EU initiative, and the question that would first arise is, what does it have to do with Southeast Asia, Singapore, etc.? So I would say that it is enormously important. Firstly, the aspiration is global gateway. So actually the idea is that you do want to make this a connection across the globe. And by nature, digital is borderless. It's meant to be global. I would say that the global gateway is important to a small country like Singapore and Estonia and Cape Verde for several reasons. Firstly, it allows us to connect across diverse regions, allows us to engage one another. For a small country that's open like Singapore, it allows us to expand our digital economy, markets, gives us access to new technologies, ideas, and it's through engagement with international partners from diverse regions with different viewpoints that we can actually benefit, engender cooperation, etc. Second, I would say that it raises the overall level of digital awareness and hygiene, promotes resilience, and it helps to bridge the digital divide, both within countries and across countries. Geographically distant locations can potentially benefit from sharing ideas, and we also need to understand that the way that the digital world is built, things that happen in one geography can actually have unintended consequences in another place. So it is important for us to understand the connections and the potential knock-on effects that we have. Third, and I think most important, is that initiatives such as this can actually push towards greater global interoperability for our infrastructure and systems. And I think this is essential. The whole idea of having internet, connectivity, etc., is to reap the benefits of the digital transformation. And in order for us to do this, we need to have systems which are interoperable. We can't afford to have splinter nets, we can't afford to have enclaves, etc. So initiatives like this allow us to achieve interoperability, which I think makes for a better world, better for our citizens, better for our societies. In Singapore, we strongly support initiatives like the Global Gateway. We're currently working with the EU on multiple initiatives. One of them is the EU-Singapore Digital Partnership, which hopes to shape digital rules and standards, etc. I want to come back to one of the points that was made, and that was that the foundation the objective of the exercise is to provide better services for our citizens. And the foundation of this is data. I think I would add another element of it. We need to have a way to have secure and safe exchanges of data. It's no use for us keeping our own data. Actually, implied in having the data that is good data is that we can exchange it. And in order to do this, we need to have safe and secure methods of exchange. And I think that's where my interest comes in. We need to have trusted connectivity. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think I couldn't agree more, and thanks for the shout out for the digital partnership with Singapore, which I think is an extremely important part of our work in the Indo-Pacific in the past couple of years. Maybe we can come back to that later. David mentioned the importance of Global Gateway for smaller countries, but you're from a huge country that we learned this morning is the size of Texas, Pedro. It's just that 90% of the territory is water, but that I think your Prime Minister underlined the importance of digital as an accelerator of reform across all sectors of the economy and society, and also, as we can see in Estonia, a multiplier of influence as well. Could you say a few words about how you would see in Cabo Verde the importance of digital transformation and anything more that you need from your partners?
Thank you so much. First of all, let me say that it's an opportunity, a great opportunity for us to be here today. And I think, especially for my generation, we take everything for granted, and it's fantastic that we have a diverse panel with people from around the world that celebrate freedom of speech, and that we should continue to have these conversations, especially in such a beautiful venue like this one in Tallinn. Regarding Global Gateway, Cabo Verde is eligible for projects of Global Gateway. We recently invested as well in a state-of-art sea submarine cable, Link, that will connect South America and Europe, and the sea submarine cables that will pass through Cabo Verde. So we are a small island state in West Africa, a very small country, but with big goals. We believe that size doesn't matter anymore. We believe that our geographical position, because to understand the history of Cabo Verde, we have to follow the route of enslaved people. Now we want to capitalize our geographical position because we are in the middle of Atlantic, 1 hour to Senegal, 3 hours to Portugal, the closest African country to US, 4 hours to Brazil. So that geographical position that once made Cabo Verde a marketplace for enslaved people, now we want to take that advantage of our geographical position to tell our own history. And we believe that when we talk about digital economy, normally we talk about capital markets, but we forget about talent. And I start my speech by saying how privileged we are to have this diverse panel where people have freedom of speech. I really believe that in 2023 we'll not think about conflicts, but everyone now is talking about conflicts again, not just in Africa, but also in Europe. So I think we have to go back and think about digital with purpose. I think it's really, really important that we think about digital with purpose. In Cabo Verde, we believe that we need to empower people and institutions. And unfortunately, resources are not well distributed in the world, but talent is. So every time we discuss about how can we end conflicts, I always say that we need to train people, we need to empower people, and not just in Africa, but across the world, and do these partnerships that, like Global Gateway, that is promoted by European Union, but is a partnership with public and private sector. We need to put more policymakers and private sector in a constant dialogue where we can define as well the future of the world using this fantastic tool that always is important to empower people, that is digital. Thank you.
Thanks very much. A small country with big goals. I think that's a great ambition, and the importance of geography and being in the right place on the map is something that we can come back to later, perhaps with other countries. Wolfgang Schläger, you're head of the EU office for the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We talked a lot about what needs to be done. Now, the EBRD, of course, is a big partner of the EU, of the European Commission and Global Gateway, in looking for finance, not just public sector finance, but also bringing in the private sector. Could you say a few words about how you're working on those issues?
Well, thank you, David, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm the first time in Tallinn ever, so I'm really very impressed. And also, this building is actually a symbol, also a bit of this transition, which Estonia stands for. but also the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Because I give you just a couple of facts and figures, because not everyone knows our bank. So we were also founded in 1991, so when Estonia was just has the recent independence, and we were founded to help actually the transition countries in Middle East Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We are a multilateral development bank. We have 71 shareholders. So where we operate, also these countries are shareholder of our bank. We are sitting in London. And the majority is, and that's why the name European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So we are, as the core is, and that's also in our founding documents, is guaranteed that the bank has the majority of EU shareholders. Plus, with US and the other G7, we have more than 3/4 actually of G7 majority in the shareholding. We are private sector oriented, so we helped the transition countries, in particular after of course, planning economies to go into open and free market economies. And that's why about 79% of our investments are with or through the private sector. We have an annual investment capacity. So in the last years, it was 10 billion per year. But last year, obviously, because our biggest country of operation is actually Ukraine, even if you see here it's on the second place, we have, last year, we provided 1.7 billion euros to Ukraine. And just a word on Ukraine, because given the geographic situation here, and we have been the biggest investor in Ukraine. We had, many don't know that we're actually being the ones dealing and managing the Chernobyl shelter and the fund which is keeping it functioning. And we had last year really invested a lot into the energy, into the gas, into the railways, and to keep the business running in the country. And we will further do that. And we had just had in our annual meeting in Samarkand this year in Uzbekistan, we had a decision, two very important decisions. One was to have a capital increase in order to continue doing what we were doing. And secondly, and this is, it's not coming to Cape Verde yet, but we are also having a decision that we will expand further to Sub-Saharan Africa. And I show you as a last slide, and then I stop, where we are actually active. So we are in the 12 EU countries and in 26 outside the EU, from Morocco to Mongolia. So, and this is where, as just my last point, and then where we are coming in the global gateway. The global gateway is, it's a bit like Cape Verde. I think it's now a concept where you see so far very little maybe on the surface, but there's so much underneath, because this has already happened. The EU was doing connectivity projects for many, many years, but I think it's the first time when it really brings everything together under a common strategy and a common communication, and to give really the partner countries a choice of transparent, sustainable, and also a long-term financing. And I think we as a bank, we work together with the EU, with the member states, with the European Investment Bank and national development banks in order really to push forward this agenda. We are proud to be part of it. We bring in all our experience in terms of private sector, but also public, and it's also combinations. We're not just financier, but we also give governments the opportunity for policy reform, which is linked very important for investments, and also to businesses. We give support to support business individually on their way. And of course, the digital agenda is getting bigger and bigger. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wolfgang. I'd like to come back to a point you started with, Julia, which is about data. Now, obviously, data, I think there's a lot of talk about critical raw materials, about lithium and cobalt and so on, but I think increasingly people realize that data is a critical raw material as well. And it's a raw material that is subject to different treatment. Different people want different things from it. There's a lot of offers out there. I think what the EU is trying to arrive at in its work on critical raw materials with its partners is to move away from an extractive model and to figure out how we can help people add value to their own data. You've spent a lot of time working in the private and working with the public sector and so on. How do you think we could best push a sort of a non-extractive, collaborative, pro-innovation model for data with our partners around the world?
Well, if you get it right, then you've transformed the digital transformation conundrum of the last 25 years. And I don't say that disrespectfully, but that is the $25 million. That is the $25 million question. A very simple answer is you show impact and you show it quickly. I think, if we look back at old waterfall contracts that were written in stone, and by the time the ink dried, the technology was outdated. We have a lot of that going on now when we talk about data and we talk about infrastructure development. Again, we've been talking about open data and linked data and big data for 15 years now. But what have I as a citizen really seen as an impact? What have you as a minister, as a government official, really been able to do with data to make the lives of your people better? And until we can quickly answer that and have models that encourage that, and then that means we've got to get over the public sector, things happened so quickly during COVID because for the first time, the risk of doing nothing was bigger than the risk of doing something. Because for all kinds of very good reasons, the public sector is risk averse. People's lives are at stake. I respect the risk aversion, but to get to that from extraction to value add, analytics, and then the ethical, responsible use of an AI that is infused with solid, good, reliable data that protects my privacy, does not surveil me, as Dr. Karp said today, is a hard slog. And you have to invest in getting the data right, but then agilely and quickly apply the analytic levels to outcomes that actually have tangible, real value, whether you're a decision maker, a policy maker, a partner of the private sector, but most importantly, a citizen. So in summary, I would say go for quick hits based on really long-term investments in strong foundations of data.
Thanks a lot. Pedro, a lot of people look at the regulatory framework for data in Europe and say, oh, that's fine for Europe, but of course, many other parts of the world, it's too sophisticated, it's not appropriate, and so on. With Cape Verde, you're looking at data in terms of the infrastructure. How do we get cables, data centers, e-government, and so on? Do you have a particular approach to this in terms of how you can deliver for your citizens? As Estonia was talking about, the individual state, giving the individual power over their own data and so on. Do you have a particular approach for that you think is appropriate?
Well, in Cabo Verde, we believe in the power of people. So we think that data should be accessible to everyone, should be transparent, and we should use data to change people's lives. That is really, for us, something that is very clear. We have a platform that, with the government, puts accessible data, and we want to make more data accessible to companies to change people's lives. We believe that decision can be made in a better way with data. In order to do that, we need to partnership with the private sector as well, but to know that it's not, data doesn't belong to governments. Data is from people. The governments, they should create a framework that protects people's data, but data should be accessible to everyone because it belongs to everyone. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we change people's lives with this tool that allows us to take decisions based on data. And I think that is a good principle. And sometimes governments are very conservative about that, but we want to change that. And that's why in Cabo Verde we are small, but we are also flexible. And we want to use technology to go faster, respecting, of course, like I said, people's privacy, but at the same time making use of technology to change their lives.
David, in Southeast Asia, obviously there's a lot of different pressures on the region right now. A lot of people looking for growth and so on. Global Gateway, there's less funding available from the public sector for Global Gateway in Southeast Asia than there is in Africa, for example. But nevertheless, we've got a lot of ideas about connectivity and so on, where we need to invest, the legal framework and so on. You talked about the importance of maintaining an interoperable data space, for example. Where do you think we need to look closely in Southeast Asia in order to ensure that we can promote a human-centric digital transformation?
Right. Thanks very much, David. Before I go there, actually, let me pick up the conversation on data. I want to make a few points about data. Firstly, as what Julia was saying, COVID forced us to make changes. Governments are inherently slow to make change, but companies, governments had to make huge changes during COVID. I want to make one point that really, from where I sit, it is a risk management issue. It's a balance between, on the one hand, security and safety versus benefit. And lastly, we have to manage costs as well. Governments have to do it, industry has to do it, etc. So collectively, we have to find a balance point, and COVID forced us to shift. Now, with all good risk management issues, the question after COVID is over, whether we realize we've made these changes and whether the risk management committees recognize that there's been a shift in risk. And if you accept that, that's fine. If not, you should really reevaluate this. So first point I want to make is that really managing this is a risk management exercise. There's no perfect balance point, etc. Second point I want to make is that data is not monolithic. Yes, there's different kinds of data. At the risk of oversimplification, I would say there's possibly 3 buckets of data. One is data that pertains to national security. Typically, we don't share our data which pertains to national security. There are good reasons why you want to have sovereign control, etc. The second is data that has economic value. I think the whole idea of the discussion is really we want to share this data, find a way that we can use the data not as an extractive, exploitative exercise, but to build on it, innovation, etc. And also we need to find a way to share it safely and securely. And the last point I would say is data that pertains to personal data. I think this is a special use case. Different jurisdictions have different approaches to data. Now, I want to share a perspective of how data is managed in East Asia. So I'll use the example of COVID applications. So in the midst of COVID, all countries had to grapple with, how do you manage people coming into close contact with others. So in East Asia, countries like Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, all landed up with similar solutions. We had applications on our cell phones, and these worked on Bluetooth technology to see who you were close to. Then the data was sent to a competent authority, mostly the Ministry of Health, who then decided that, you've been in contact with Wolfgang. Wolfgang is now determined to be a COVID patient, and David, you have to stay at home. It was a decision that our societies took that we were prepared to take for the COVID crisis. Now, from a European perspective, this is a bit shocking because my personal data, Wolfgang's personal data, actually has been shared with the Ministry of Health. Now, in East Asia, this is something that we were prepared to accept. Governments were transparent about it, but the society was willing to accept it because there is a recognition that yes, one has personal rights, but we collectively, for a variety of reasons, are willing to give up some of that personal right for the community good, for the societal good, especially in the case of COVID, because lives were at stake. Now, why is this so? And the point I want to make is that different societies, because of their history, their culture, or the political climate, have different balance points for the use, sharing of data. Now, the example I give would not be possible in the EU because of GDPR. I understand completely. But the point I want to make is that there's perhaps in the use of data not a one-size-fits-all perspective. And the example I give is one which countries, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, collectively, independently arrived at. Perhaps because we have similar culture, similar political climate, etc. May not be replicatable in other societies. A point I want to make is that it is something that we should be mindful of when we move towards the an initiative like the Global Digital Compact, that different societies, for a variety of reasons, have different balance points. Hope this is helpful.
Absolutely. It takes me back to the April 2020 when the whole European Commission changed and we all became a COVID administration, and I was actually spending my time phoning up colleagues in Taiwan, in Seoul, in Singapore, asking, what are you doing? How are you using digital to do this? And so on, so that we could develop our own solutions. And now I think the COVID app that we developed within the EU is now used by about 50 countries around the world to promote interoperability, which is an important point you made early on, David, between different solutions. But you raise an important point about what is often termed the values debate and how we can be interoperable between different parts of the world, when of course we have to acknowledge that we have different societal approaches to different things. Maybe, Pedro, you talked about the importance of democracy, the importance of all freedom of speech, and behind all of us here is that we're all committed to the same sort of outcomes for our society and so on. How do you think we can ensure that that is a vision that is shared by more people around the world, perhaps looking at Africa for a start, where we see there's a lot of competition from different partners? What do you think that we need to do in the EU to ensure that the way we view the digital transformation is seen to be delivering for more people?
Well, first of all, include Africans in this fantastic opportunity that is a huge market that needs to do a leapfrog. So you have a lot of tech companies looking into the continent as an opportunity. But if we don't include Africans, we keep doing the same mistakes that we've done in the past. So I think it's really important. First of all, because I believe that it's a win-win. Europeans, they have expertise, but Africans, they have a lot of ambition, and I believe, well, Africa is the continent of the future, especially because we have a lot of young people, and also because there is a big wheel of transformation. And in order to do that leapfrog, like I said, you need innovation, you need technology. So I think it's time for Europeans, Americans, Asians, and Africans, first of all, to start thinking about a common ground in terms of technology, in terms of regulation. I think that is really something that it's going to be a very hot topic in the future. Can we, as the world, having a common view about protecting people's rights in the digital sphere? It's possible to have that conversation because, again, of course, we need to protect business, we need to make money, we need to empower people, but in order to do so, in order to empower as well private sector, we have to have a common understanding. So I think that is the first step should be about training people, and I think that is essential, really, really important. And scarcity of labor here in Europe, I know that is a problem. I travel in Europe and I see that European Union is in need of people of young age that are able to work. Well, in Africa you have a lot of young people. In Cabo Verde we want them to work remotely from Cabo Verde We don't want them to leave. Actually, we are telling our brains that it's time to return. Bright people, they should return to their homeland and, well, work from any company in the world, but not having to move. And sometimes we have this idea that in the world everyone wants to leave their place. It's not true. In my country we have 29 degrees the entire year, beautiful beaches, no traffic at all. Democracy and democratic values are part of our history. But people leave because scarcity of water, because they need better jobs. But while we are seeing people that work for, well, you see people that work for restaurants and the hotel industry, they are leaving the country. At the same time, you see people that work for technology companies returning to Cabo Verde. And we have the double of the population living abroad. So I think there is a huge opportunity as well. We also have a program for digital nomads, and I want to invite everyone to visit our country. But I think it's essential that we think about the world without boundaries, and digital allows that. So why someone in the village of Sant Antão, the small island of Cabo Verde, cannot have the same training as a young person here in Estonia, Tallinn? With technology, everything is possible. So we need to take advantage of that. We need to make sure that, okay, if people immigrate from Africa to Europe, if they do it with IT skills, it will be less of a problem. And immigration, we are discussing again, immigration. Imagine talent being able to flew from one country to the other with skills. Would not be a problem for anyone, because people can add value. And I think that is really important, again, to think about how can we train people and understand that, like I said before, resources are not well distributed, but luckily, talent is.
Great, so we can look forward to an e-residency visa system in Cabo Verde very soon, I guess. Huh? So we talked about collaboration, we talked about data, and you pointed to the importance of bringing all stakeholders into the discussion. No? Wolfgang, the EBRD has a long experience of working in Central and Eastern Europe and so on, and now expanding the mandate. Could you say a few words about how you see the role of all of the various stakeholders in this? We talked about the private sector, but obviously, of course, investing in this, as Pedro said, if we're going to make the right investments, we need to ensure that this is a priority for society as a whole. How do you in EBRD work with all the various stakeholders in figuring out how you're going to be investing?
Well, first of all, something which I wanted to underline at the beginning, which I have forgotten, but one of the key advantages of the EBRD is that we are working on the ground. So we have we have 3,000 people working for the bank, and 1/3, so 1,000 are really in those countries which I have showed. And that is very important. So when you ask me for the including stakeholders in now Global Gateway, I think it's, first of all, predominantly important that you are in the countries, in the partner countries, that you know the business, that you know the administration, you know the shortcomings, you know the economy, and that is what we are doing. So this kind of combination is between public-private partnership. So looking at the regulatory aspects, that's where we are starting to work with governments on to put the provisions, the regulations, the rules into place, which are then needed for the investments. And then, of course, the private sector, when we are going in countries like we are moving to Sub-Saharan Africa, probably in 2025, we are starting first also with small scale, with working with the business community, with the business associations, in order to prepare the ground for the enabling environment. And of course, and I think that's what I heard a couple of times now, what is important, the people, you know. So one thing which is important, and also with our approaches with this digital divide, must not happen. You know, there are so many people in the countries where we're working, be it in Africa, be it in Central Asia, who have so far a lack of access to the internet. And it starts with that. So we are working, of course, on the accessibility. Central Asia, you know, is landlocked, so it's a huge thing. In 50% don't have access there. So we're thinking with the region about, and the European Union, by the way, on satellite kind of installations. Also important, it's of course a lot about safe and secure data, and that was a lot mentioned already. And I think what's also important is that people know what's happening with the data, but also how to use this new technology. So, I mean, leapfrogging is good, but when you consider that, I mean, we grew up with mobile phones. So, and if we don't know how it works, I ask my children. But there are so many people out there in Central Asia who have never had a mobile phone or a smartphone, and suddenly, from one day to another, when they will have access, they have access to all the good and the bad things. And that's why we also need to educate these people.
Yes.
So skills is very important. And I think this is also where we are helping governments, the business community, in order also to improve their digital skills.
Great, thanks a lot. Well, we've talked a lot up here, but as I said at the beginning, I think in order to thank you for listening to all of us, we can give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you have. So the lights are kind of in my eyes, but I can more or less see.
Very bright.
Do we have some questions from the audience to any of our panelists, or any observations on Global Gateway and what we need to do in this area? Questions? Yes, please. And maybe if you could introduce yourself when you ask the question, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Federica Bicchi from the London School of Economics. And it's actually a question for the EAS. What should we be looking for as the next step? What will be the next milestone in the Global Gateway? Because, as you say, there has been a lot of talking about it, but as it has been mentioned by our panelists, not much comes out, actually. So what should we be looking for as the next step, please? Thank you.
Well, I guess I can take that question. Apart from lots more investments by the EBRD, by the EIB and so on, what's actually happening? And I think you're quite right that the first year or so was spent in preparation, putting together projects in this area takes a long time. And one important point is that while a lot of people say the Belt and Road was quick and so on, of course the first 3 years of the Belt and Road, it was just recycling of old projects. And one thing that we said to ourselves in the EU is we said, Global Gateway, it's a new investment, a new initiative. It will be based on new money. So therefore, when we announced all of the 78 flagship projects in March this year, every single one of those involved new money from the new budget. So it wasn't something we invented 5 years ago and we're sticking a new label on it. So we're, in this sense, we're trying to be quite coherent and saying, which is why things take a while. But I mean, I think that announcement of the first set of projects in March was quite illustrative, and it made it a lot easier for me when I'm talking to people about Global Gateway, not to talk about intentions and aims and ambitions and aspirations, but actually say, look, the Rogun Dam in Tajikistan, the Medusa cable across the Mediterranean, the digital alliance in Latin America and so on. These are much more tangible, and these are projects that are all ongoing. You'll be able to figure out how they're going in the next milestone, which is on 25th, 26th of October, when we'll be holding the first Global Gateway Forum in Brussels. President von der Leyen is inviting heads of state of government from many partners around the world, and private sector and civil society to come to Brussels and to talk about how Global Gateway is going. I'm sure she will talk about that in the State of the Union on the 13th of September. So that's milestone number 1 for everybody in the EU, State of the Union. Next one, Global Gateway Forum at the end of October, and there we'll be looking at the progress that we made, what we need to do in all of the various sectors, so things like the Just Energy Transition Partnership that we're doing with South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on, all of these things, the critical raw materials partnerships and things, how we're doing. And then the next milestone is the Global Gateway Board at the end of the year, which is not so much a big general public type of event, bringing in partners. It's the governance facility. This will be the second meeting where President von der Leyen will be discussing with the ministers of foreign affairs of the member states and saying, okay, how do you think it's going? Are you satisfied? But also, this is a Team Europe project. It's not just the Commission's money, it's all of the member states as well. And I think that's one of the interesting things we were talking about, bringing in all of the various financing arms. And I think that's something that the EU has not been able to do as well in the past that we're trying to do with Global Gateway, which is to bring in EU funding, grants, blended finance, loans, private sector, but also export credit finance, for example. How do we combine export credits with Indici Global Europe Commission funding and so on in order to have better examples? So we'll be talking about all of those at the end of December. So 13th of September, 25th of October, and then mid-December. Those are the next milestones. And at the Global Gateway Board at the end of the year, we'll probably also be releasing sort of the list of flagship projects for next year. So that's another big bunch of projects that we're finalizing now, including, we hope, a lot of projects in digital and in energy and climate. Thanks. So, other questions? Please.
Hi, just maybe a suggestion. So my name is Morten, I'm from the UN University looking at policy-driven electronic governance. And what we find in terms of data, and the personal data in particular, is twofold. Yes, we want to put the user in the driver's seat of what data government has on us and when it's used. But we also want to do less administrative bureaucratic service delivery, more proactive personalized service delivery. So the conundrum really is twofold. Do we give people the choice of opting out of proactive personalized service delivery if they want to keep the right of being forgotten, as in the GDPR? But with the caveat that this means that I must fill out the form and provide the data every time I interact with government. Yeah? So this is a model that can actually work in a legal and regulatory sense. But it does have some caveats around treating people the same. The other thing is maybe around the digital gateway. So one of the things we see is in social security. So the International Social Security Association in Geneva actually have a number of pilots on cross-border data exchange. So Spain and Uruguay is working on a pilot of exchanging social security data for people that work and retire in both countries. So this is maybe a partner that you may want to consider, because social security is again this dilemma of the weakest in society facing the most administrative burdens. And it's one that also links to the SDGs, the Global Digital Compact coming up, etc. And it's a high volume, high frequency service for both businesses and employers. So maybe it's worth considering. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. I don't know, Julia, do you have some, and David maybe, do you have some
First of all,
ideas on that?
It's always wonderful to hear from Morten. He's been dedicating his life and his career to studying these issues, and it is spot on, right? Denmark, where Morten is from, was the first country to embrace digital by default, and it's easy for us to forget how controversial that was, because it had a risk of leaving people behind, but it also gave people the choice to opt in. And Morten, I think your comments, they tie to the heart of where we're going with AI and data and cloud that I've been talking about, because we finally have the holy grail of personalized services within our grasp. But we all have also, with the last 6 months of concerns and brow knitting around AI and ethics and surveillance, we also have a oh my gosh moment. Do we want these personalized services for all the reasons Morten has detailed? And I think it does come back to opting in and opting out. I think at the end of the day, it comes back to David's comments about different cultures and different societies will accept things to differing levels. I recently did a little tour of AI regulations and approaches to regulation. And on the one hand, you had a kind of China model of promoting state businesses and companies through AI regulation. On the other hand, you had the US and now UK. I'm someone with UK citizenship, very sad that the UK is not part of the EU anymore, but Wild West. Anything goes because innovation has to explode and money needs to be made and the world's going to be better. And I've really come to respect the EU's sort of risk-based approach based on use cases. And I think that that's where it comes back to your question more. Risk-based, personal choice, the ability to opt in and opt out. But then, Pedro, it also comes back to people having the skills and the human capital development to know what they are opting in and out, and that we don't just have people that are most at risk and most in need of the advances of digital services not doing it because it's too overwhelming, and so they just get burdened with paper and without the benefits. But it's a fascinating question, Morten. Thank you.
Can I just build on that? I think it's a great question, and I think it speaks to the challenge that we are facing. On the one hand this, on the other hand that. I want to point out a few points. First is that it's not a problem that is unique to governments. Personalized services are now something which governments are potentially able to do. But I want to say that actually, big tech has been doing this for a couple of years now. We don't quite realize this. Now, when it's done well, then you get information that's pushed to you just when you need it. When I go to a shopping center, I get a message which says that shop XYZ has a sale going on, right? It's wonderful, for me to know, etc. But sometimes when it's not done well, it's a bit spooky. I have a conversation with my wife, maybe you want to think about a holiday, in the summer, and then suddenly, I have all kinds of advertisements on my feed, regardless of whether I'm interested or not. So sometimes it's done well, it can be a great service to the individual, but other times it can be a bit spooky. Now, the challenge for the consumer is whether A, I have a choice, B, this is actually aligned with what I'm comfortable with, and C, whether I know enough to make the choice. I put it that we are thrust into the 21st century, but many of us have still got 20th century instincts. We don't fully understand the technology. Is it really possible for us to understand what is being used by my data? How others are making use of my data? Potentially someone is benefiting from my data without my full understanding. So that's the point I want to make. So governments are now potentially in the same space. It's strange also that citizens react to governments having our data in one way, but we perhaps don't react to big tech having the same kind of data, exploiting it in the same way. I find this a bit interesting, the behavior, because one could argue that in our countries, our governments are accountable because it's a democratic system. If I'm not happy with what you do, I can make my feelings known at the ballot box. I'm not sure how I can express my views to big tech. They're not quite accountable, at least not to a small country, etc. So again, a bit of a conundrum. I'm not sure how to deal with this. I think that ultimately the experience suggests that when we try to roll out services in Singapore, it's not one size fits all. I don't think we can find a perfect answer that would meet everyone's needs. I think that's impossible. Society is a normal distribution. Wherever we fit, there'll be some people who fall on the left, some people who fall on the right. So perhaps we're leaning towards an outcome where it will be opt-out. I fully understand that if these people opt out, then they would then lose some of the convenience. But increasingly, we find that in Singapore, some people want to opt out because it's not just about the convenience, it's about the fear of losing their life savings. We have fraud scams which are taking place, and if my bank, my electronic banking accounts get compromised, I run potentially the risk of losing my life savings. And we have had some citizens at home who are now telling the banks, I wish to opt out of this, I wish to opt out of that e-service because I'm concerned about whether I would in a moment of distraction, weakness, click on the wrong button, and then run the risk of losing my life savings. So I think we're having to deal with some of these challenges. I think ultimately we have to take one that's an approach which is risk-based. I think it's something that has to be evolved over time as we build up our instincts. And lastly, I think we have to be agile as we move this.
Yeah. Trust is the point that we're all making, I guess, and how to gain trust and how to sustain trust. And I think the point we're all making that in a lot of this digital world, how to sustain trust is to keep delivering services, because perhaps, I guess, the calculation people make with big tech is I'm giving something and I see very clearly what I'm getting back. I'm getting digital outputs. Perhaps government is delivering a lot of analog outputs like roads, safety, health, and so on, but not enough digital outputs. And we heard from Estonia, you want to sustain trust in the digital economy, you have to deliver digital services. Perhaps that's the key. And on the risk-based approach, I think this was I remember the discussion in the Trade and Technology Council with the United States, where a while ago, voices in the US were telling us that the EU approach to AI was just innovation killing and so on, and over-regulation, but that now we've moved to a common understanding that a risk-based approach is the one that we need. Of course, China helped us come to that conclusion because they realized what is on the top of the risk profile in terms of social scoring and so on. So implicitly, you have to put AI applications into different levels of risk. And so I think that's a very helpful discussion. I think we've got time for maybe one more question, please. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Mei Lin Fang, chair of the People-Centered Internet, but also a Singaporean. I want to ask that the Global Gateway is taking into account this issue, which is that companies that are listed on the stock exchange have an increasing proportion of their value in intangible assets, but small, medium enterprises can only borrow based on their tangible assets. The continuation of this trend means we will run dry in terms of loans and working capital for small, medium enterprises. And I wonder what the Global Gateway is doing to address this problem.
Okay. Maybe you can ask your question as well, and then we can try to take both of those.
Yes, thank you. My name is Ivar Tallo, and I'm actually Estonian. And I wanted first to compliment you for the excellent panel, but I wanted to take it back actually from where Morten was leading you. And this seems to be the big problem. Let me just say, well, we in Estonia, and I had the privilege to draft our basic principles for information society in 1997. Which kind of started to formalize the road towards digitization. But before that, in 1996, my first engagement with the Estonian government was I was drafting a law for databases and registers. So what I want to say is really that in many cases this development has started or is kind of in the midway, whereas it should start from the data, the digital data itself. And you addressed it in the panel, but then, Julia, you were saying that, well, we need some quick solutions. But there are, I believe, no quick solutions really in this sense. And that is where EBRD should come in. I mean, when I've been talking to people in different countries of how to fashion the policy problems, I'm drawing the parallel, and I'm drawing the parallel with oil. When it is on the ground, it isn't yet the value. It will become value when there is an infrastructure where you extract it, you refine it, you sell it. I mean, all this value chain will be there. So what I think, and it is a long process and it is a very expensive process. And that is where I believe this, where EU can actually both show the rules and provide the capital for these countries to do. Thank you very much.
Great. So 2 points, maybe Wolfgang. Finance. How do we? I can't address the specific question about borrowing capacity of SMEs, but how do we expand the envelope of possible financial tools that we have to support the objectives of Global Gateway?
I think it's not just a problem of Global Gateway. I mean, the access to finance for SMEs, and that's where we go in very different sectors actually in and help with the cooperation in combination with the private banks in a certain country by de-risking that, of course, startups, innovation, etc., has often the problem that the collaterals are limited. So we have products for that. I think in particular on the innovation front, and which is of course then linked very much to the digital sphere. But in general terms, I think there also on the EU level, there needs to be some further thinking about venture capital and how that can be further improved compared to like countries for the United States, where it seems actually easier. And on the second question, I think I fully agree just what you have said. I mean, there needs to be both sides, regulatory aspect and the financing aspect, and it's a continuous process. Yeah? And we will see how it's going to go. I personally believe this Global Gateway overall, in all its facets, just to also come back to the colleague from the LSE, I think it will show actually a positive impact, which the EU, you know, in our current situation, the geopolitical situation, this is now a EU and a Commission which has been becoming much more a geopolitical institution and is pushing this agenda, and Global Gateway, with support of all the partners, member states, the financiers, will help to make a point, and I hope a positive one.
Great. That sounds like a good conclusion to wrap up on, including, as you said, further thinking required. So I think we all have a lot of thinking to do. Thanks very much to the panelists for all of your points. Thanks very much to the audience for your questions, and sorry if you didn't have enough time to ask your question. I think we're now, we've talked about avoiding a fragmented world. We're now moving to the next keynote, which is from Anne-Marie Engtoft Meldegaard, the Danish tech ambassador, who will be talking about tech diplomacy in a fragmented world. Thanks very much for keeping the time, and see you again soon. Thank you.